It said sharing is not turned on.
You should be good to go now, Violet.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, share. And let's go ahead and put this in presentation. There we go. So yeah, I want to thank everybody for coming today. I think everybody who's on the call today was here last time. So I wasn't necessarily going to do any new introductions unless anybody wasn't able to make it last time, but I think we had everyone.
I think we do. I did want to
Yeah.
note, just for the good of the order, that Linda Kessner has sort of stepped up and stepped in as sort of the de facto chair for the community members. So want to thank Linda for that. She's been a great conduit for folks, and then has helped share information with me and Cody, and it seems to be working really well. So I want to thank you, Linda, and
my pleasure.
Yes, thank you, Linda. And I have to say it's been extremely helpful. I think everyone on the committee has just been very involved and very helpful since last time we spoke. And so today I just wanted to go through, give you guys some updates from the project team on what we've been working on since last time we met. And then want to go over, for me, for my selfish reasons, what I want to get out of this is go over our idea, our design for the public meeting at the end of the month, and just kind of runs through our concept, what we want to get, what we want to present, and what we want to hear back and why. And then I want to give a chance to make sure that the committee is able to kind of present out to us as well any issues or concerns or any feedback that you guys are hearing. So we have time set aside on the agenda for that as well. And then I want to just open it to a discussion, and I have a couple of prompts, questions to kind of ask about what we presented, to see if it's logical, if it makes sense to you, if you think it's a good design for public engagement within your community, or if you have any adjustments that you would like to see us do before we have that meeting at the end of this month. So here's our schedule. You've seen this document before. It's changed a little bit. Again, I think my legal background, I tend to use the term a living, breathing document a lot. So one of the things that I will highlight, we're here in October, where we have a community workshop at the end of this month. We're doing this advisory committee meeting. We're talking with Planning Commission and City Council next week as well around housing. So we have a lot going on this month. We're also, you'll see, working on the existing conditions and baseline conditions analysis. Our team has been attacking that, what will ultimately be a longer kind of document that'll be part of the project, kind of library of documents as part of the project. And we've started by addressing housing, the goals that we're going to address in phase one. So goal 1, community engagement, goal 5 on open space and parks, and also housing. So we're kind of looking at the existing conditions around that, and I have some slides on that today. So one of the other things that's changed, speaking of phasing of this project, is we found out that we might have some assistance with the coastal chapters. And so we will, and maybe Layla, I don't know if there's anything additional that you want to say about that, but we're meeting with a group to discuss some assistance that we can get around the coastal chapters. And so we have actually switched the phasing a bit on that. So the coastal and shoreline beaches and dunes used to be phase 4. And so we have moved it up because there is a grant available to do some of that work. And much like the housing, where we're using some DLCD funds to do that housing work, it has to be within the fiscal year. So we're doing that first. Similarly, we found out about some assistance we can get with coastal beaches and dunes. And so we're moving that up in the schedule. So I will keep you guys posted as we find out more, but we are meeting to discuss that, I believe, next week.
It was actually really neat. I'll just jump in if I can.
Yeah, thank
because
you, Scott.
I was excited because DLCD reached out and they're working on a model code specifically for comprehensive chapters, considering beaches and dunes, and said, hey, we'd love to have, we know you're doing your comprehensive plan update. We've got some model language, not code, model language that we can use for policies and whatnot. And they wanted to assist us and give us a little bit of funding, not a lot, but enough to just be there and help us out. And so we thought it made sense to update the schedule and phasing.
Thank you. Perfect. And so yes, you'll see we kind of switched phase 2 with phase 4. So we'll just kind of do that, those issues first, which I think makes sense. And then it'll move things just a little bit. Everything will kind of shuffle back. So if I go, let's see if I'm able to go back. So one of the things that's changed on this schedule is the green star that says community workshop. We've moved the one from May up to February because if in order to match that coastal and dunes beaches schedule. And so we would meet with the public a little bit earlier. We had been planning to do the next workshop after this one in May because we're going to be tackling land use. But since we will be doing this coastals first, we're actually going to be probably ready to talk with the public a little bit sooner. So that's a little bit different. And so those changes, I just wanted to highlight those and keep you guys in the loop as best we can on that. Any of these updates are also going to be, as always, on the Manzanita, Envision Manzanita website, which I hope you guys have all had a chance to look at and familiarize yourselves with. And yeah, so I'd like to jump in, if there's no questions on schedule, I'd like to jump in on the design of the first public meeting. So I don't see any questions. For the design overview, I want to talk a little bit about, we'll go into what the project elements are, things that you guys are very familiar with, similar to our first meeting where we kind of met with you guys and got you up to speed on what the project was going to be about and what the timeline was going to be. We'll do that with the public as well, because this will be our first time meeting with them. We then tend to go into a bit of a community profile, or this is the existing conditions or baseline conditions. And we will be discussing, again, those 3 statewide planning goals that we're tackling in this first summit, which is citizen involvement, natural resources, scenic and historic and open space, and housing. We have designed a mapping activity. It's been brought to my attention that people like to do things at these meetings and feel like they've kind of accomplished. I think it keeps people really engaged. And so I'll show you guys the map that we've come up with and discuss the activity that we're going to have people do. Yeah, so then after the mapping activity, usually each table that's worked on a map will stand up and report out what they worked on and what they found and what they discussed as a small group. So usually we have about, I think, 8 to 10 tables, but we're working with the city to figure out exactly what the logistics over how many tables we can fit in the space are. So one of the things we'll talk about is citizen involvement. Like I said, goal 1, we want to make sure that the public understands that for Manzanita, your representative bodies are the Planning Commission and the City Council. That Manzanita has a goal to have opportunities for engagement should be well advertised, they should be accessible. And currently that the strategies for public engagement should be really connected with your current demographic profile. So you want to make sure that when you're designing engagement, that you're looking at who's living in Manzanita, who are we as a community. And so when we looked at that, we found that, and some of this was in the public involvement plan that you guys saw last time, that there's a comparatively higher proportion of the community living with disabilities, and that most residents are over 55. We're living in Manzanita. So that's something that we take into consideration when designing community engagement. So something to clarify, last time we talked about this, we were designing the engagement for the comp plan update. But again, this is designing just Manzanita's approach to community engagement, even outside of any specific project, but just the way that the city engages the community. Natural resources. We have this map was created for us within 3J, and you can see it shows locally significant wetlands, estuaries, any bodies of water, any parks, and any slopes greater than 25%. So you can see that there's no wetlands, estuaries, or floodplains within city limits or in the UGB. We do monitor the impact that estuaries and floodplains have on water infrastructure for Manzanita. And Layla knows much more about that than I do. That through this, this goal also covers conservation of beaches and dunes, which Manzanita accomplishes through their beaches and dunes overlay zone. So there's also historic preservation, includes a number of structures within Manzanita, including the Pine Grove Community House. And they're bordering on 2 state parks with multiple recreational spaces within Manzanita. So again, that addresses our goal 5 existing conditions. So we'll show that to the public. The housing. So for goal 10, housing data, what we did is we pulled a number of things from the census that are available from the census. And when I look at the census information for Manzanita, and comparatively to Tillamook County, and I see some hands. So let me just get through this slide and then we'll go to the questions. So Tillamook County is listed as 52% affordable. And I will say that that means that residents, 52% of households are paying less than 30% of their available income on their housing costs. 24% is considered unaffordable. And when I break it into these 3 categories, affordable is less than 30%, greater than 30%, say 30% to 50 is unaffordable. Severely unaffordable is households paying greater than 50% of their available income in housing costs. And so when I look at this, the affordability for that 50%, it's very similar. And the donut is Manzanita. It's very similar for the county. But when I look at these unaffordable and severely unaffordable, Manzanita has much more percentage in that severely unaffordable category than the surrounding county. You can see, not shocking, that most of the housing mix is mostly single family homes, 87%, and they're predominantly owner occupied. What you're all interested in, I'm sure, is the vacancy rate, which is currently up in the 70s for Manzanita. And the census can show us how many are due to the occurrence of seasonal, recreational, and what they call occasional use. And so I've given you a chart here on the housing type by vacancy, and it shows you how many units are listed as vacant in Manzanita by type. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a second, and Rick, I don't know between Rick and Patrick which one was first.
First one.
So I'll just start with Rick because you're higher on my screen.
Yeah, easy one, Violet. I just wanted an explanation of the acronym UGB on the previous slide. I'm not familiar with that.
Wonderful. Sometimes, for those of us who do this all the time, somebody will start throwing stuff out there. So that's a wonderful thing for me to remember. Urban growth boundary. So that's the urban growth boundary for Manzanita.
And why is there a differentiation? There are 2 areas where I noted on the lower portion of the screen where it is different. What should we know or understand about that?
Well, one, the red is the city limit.
Yeah.
So what is actually annexed, and the purple is the urban growth boundary. So that is the greater boundary where the city is able to possibly grow in the future.
So those are future annexation areas of the city. The UGB also relies on city zoning, not county zoning. So that's a differentiation. So it's kind of odd. It's not in the city, but it's future areas that could be the city, but currently has city zoning. So it's just that those are the areas that you're most likely to grow as a city.
Got it. Thank you very much.
And there's also ways you can do urban growth boundary expansions. If cities prove that they need land for additional land for housing based on their forecast, or additional land for jobs, based on forecasts. Some cities do go ask for urban growth boundary expansions.
And if I could just add real quick, we are in the process of expanding our city boundary because we just annexed 12 acres of land. So that's in process, but it hasn't been finalized. So you'll see our city limit change. So just don't want people to be surprised next time you see the map. It will likely look different.
That's great. Thank you very much.
You bet. Good question.
And Patrick?
Yeah, just a quick question. How do you define vacancy rate and who measures that?
That is a great question. So I've done a deep dive and gone full nerd on the census data on vacancy. So again, this is census. So we use the most available, which is the 2022 census that came out, and it's reporting. And so they'll go into if something is listed as owner occupied, the census goes door to door. They come out and they ask, is somebody occupying this space? If there's one of the rentals is like, if it's been rented, but nobody's occupied it within 2 months, then it's listed as vacant. So there's a whole, I can share the methodology a bit around how the census counts. But so they have owner occupied, renter occupied, and vacant. Those are the three. Every housing unit gets put into one of those buckets. And if it's listed as vacant, it can be listed as vacant but available for rent, vacant or but available for sale, or vacant and used for, where's the terminology I had? I want to get it right. Seasonal, recreational, or occasional use. And that's the majority of your vacant units are listed under that category, which is a new thing that the census started tracking recently. Back when I was getting my master's in this in 2015, that was not a thing. So I'm glad the census is tracking it. But there are also other data points that we're going to be looking at as we work on housing strategies and housing policies that count the kind of VRBO and other things and kind of keep track of the units, but that's not available through the census. Other than what I've shown you.
Maybe if we use these in the future, maybe just consider breaking that out into this one, and then vacancy rate excluding the seasonal ones available, for use, just to show what real vacancy is versus kind of second home use.
Yeah, I have to say, there's another thing I'm kind of considering. So standard vacancy rate might be 4%, maybe 7%, or it's 76%, because there's a lot of units that are seasonal, right? And so what is hard from the, what is difficult from the census is knowing whether they're seasonal for the owner or if they're seasonal available for this occasional use for VRBO. And so again, in terms of buying that data, that's something that's becoming more relevant and becoming more urgent for a lot of communities, particularly at the coast. So it's something that, yeah, go ahead, Scott.
I was just thinking though, Patrick, that's actually a really good thought though, is figuring, what if we weren't a community that, and I don't know if I'm not making promises that we can find this information or have the data, but what if we were a community that didn't have this issue with seasonal, recreational, occasional use housing? What would our actual vacancy rate would it be? And Violet's probably right. It would be more in the 7% range, probably.
Well, that's standard, but I mean, other cities at the coast that we've seen might have what I've seen is like what we consider kind of elevated vacancy rate due to this seasonal, and that may be 25 or 30%. I had not seen a 76%.
True.
Until this project. Yeah, John.
Well, I was thinking that the city has data on our, what you're calling VRBO, short-term rental. And
yeah, I shouldn't use that one as it's just the one that
we have a percentage number, and I'm guessing we have an actual number that we could break out from the, the 76% fairly easily.
Yeah.
I can.
It's 17% right now. I think
it's 17. Yeah, and you probably, Scott, the number, right? It's like so you could subtract that from the 846, and we can put that orange piece I think it would be pretty easy to show 3 different categories, like a,
It
Yeah.
is. It is,
Uh,
and we have it. My question, and this is not, there's no wrong answer to this. It's really what you think. This is one of the, to me, this is one of the most useful things with this committee is, do you think that's something that you want us to be presenting to the public? Do you think we want us to be kind of engaging at this public summit? And I'm going to ask you to just put a pin in that. I want you to think about, like, as we're talking about it, there's a lot of things that you guys are curious about. It's fascinating. I get curious about it. The question becomes, which of these points is most helpful for the public in understanding what we're going to kind of ask them to do or ask them to weigh in on? Yeah, Patrick.
I think that's an excellent question. Just jump in. The STR question distracts us sometimes just because people want a number. And I think the most important thing to say is for what we want to accomplish in the workshop, what's relevant and what's useful. And with only this many number of homes to deal with in such a small community, how useful is it to start to parse it into whether 5 belong in one category or 5 belong in the other? So I think it's the use that should drive it. Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. I'll be more
Thank you.
polite.
I like
Thank
that
you,
point.
Catherine. Yeah, exactly.
are we trying to get at a number that's not available for rental or occupancy? I'm trying to, I agree with definitely agree with Catherine that the STR is a distraction. And I don't know whether it's relevant for the community engagement. And maybe just the big 846 orange number of, hey, we can't use these for housing because they're either used for something else or just unoccupied by design. So,
Right.
or seasonally occupied by design. So.
I really like
Right.
that, John. And I think, maybe it's not, we don't highlight the census numbers as much as we say simply, we know we have a high number of vacation rentals. The city has data on it. Here's the city's data on vacation rentals. And then, and then we can talk about, but the tricky part is it does really tie to affordability. So, but I'm not sure that, we need to get too deep into that too. Because really,
Right.
Go ahead, Violet.
No, I was going to say, I have one thing I want to say, and then I want to hear what Mark has to say, because his hand is up. But so, this slide is an example of where I thought threading that needle between providing people some numbers and some metrics around what they already know is an issue, and might already be weighing on their mind. So we're giving them some information and having that conversation without overloading or making it feel like we're asking them to like solve this today, or here's all these numbers and you need to tell us what it means. So if I've missed the mark and you feel like maybe this should be more vague, we could go more kind of summarizing or takeaways or lessons learned by this, and just say something like vacancy rate is being impacted by these short-term rentals. Or as Patrick said, if we use some of these metrics, it's nice to know, say, hey, if you use this metric, please explain it more, right? Because once I've opened the door to that, am I confusing people? So any feedback on, where this lands would be really helpful. Yeah, Mark.
So I think it definitely feels like a confusion then for me about the use of the word vacancy, and then following that with the categorization in our specific case, it being, well, it's seasonal, it's recreational, it's short-term rental, when really it's the actual or the normal implication of vacancy is how the pressure that it puts on, or maybe it's an outcome of the lack of affordability. So in this case, maybe it's too much of a driver for us to really be able to help this conversation move forward with this. And instead, we need to find out what portion of this vacancy is not STR and talk about that portion, because that's the normal context in which this discussion happens for other towns.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Yeah, I like that. So I think, again, if we take the two data points that we have from the census, which is breaking things out between rental, owner, and vacant, but then also taking the vacancy and breaking it out into other categories. If we kind of mesh them and say there's owner occupied. Oh no.
Oh, no, Violet
Rent.
froze.
Oh, good.
Back. You're back. You froze for a minute.
Yes, now I'm getting your connection is unstable. So I was saying if we take that vacancy piece and just say there's owner occupied, rental occupied, available for sale, available for rental, and then what we would think of as seasonal, and then what we would think of as truly vacant, right? So maybe it's just creating one chart with those categories so that people can see what the issue is. And I can try that and see how it looks. Yeah, John.
Is the are the multifamily numbers down here, 33 occupied, 45 unoccupied, are they included in the far left? Those are strictly detached on the far left. Is that correct?
Yes. So
Okay.
the census gives us a single unit detached, so single family detached homes,
And then
single family attached, and then multi unit up to 2 to 9 units, and then over 10, which you
So
don't
they're-
have, and then mobile.
Yeah, they're additive to the detached units on the left. Did I lose you?
Additive, meaning
Meaning
nothing is double
the
counted.
citywide numbers take the columns and add them up, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
got it.
Perfect.
Thank
Patrick.
you.
Yeah, just briefly, if you want us to give you a little quick input on just how this is best communicated for community engagement, I would just say this. If you look at this whole thing, excluding the third bullet point, it's extraordinary. I think this is really useful. It's helpful. I like the affordability aspect. I like the first two bullets. I like the breakouts of all the different forms of homes. I'll just say this. Just be careful. We should probably think about maybe phrasing vacancy and vacancy rates a little differently, just because if we're showing this to the community, we don't want to lose our credibility on day one or take away from all the strong points that are on the slide. And this vacancy rate, people will raise their hand right away and go, that's not my understanding of vacancy. I don't see that's not. I would hate for this one thing to distract from something that's exceptional. And number two, I would say the whole point of the concept of vacancy is to discuss the need for housing. And these concepts of vacancy, to say that vacancy is so high would potentially be saying we don't need additional housing because we have so much vacancy, and that's counterintuitive to what we're trying to accomplish. So just be careful on that. And then finally, if you're going to discuss, this 846 vacant homes, this is very consistent with what the short-term rental committee discussed. But I would add short-term rentals in what's called second homes. There's about 260 second short-term rentals, and there's about 500-ish, and Layla knows the real numbers, second homes that are not short-term rentals. So the reality is we have probably very few vacant homes that can be used for other purposes. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I think there's excellent points, and I think the idea of trust is huge. One of the reasons why we want to discuss these things with you guys first and see, is this making sense, or what's your reaction to it is, vacancies talked a lot about in the news, and it's talked a lot about in various communities, I'm sure within your community. So I'm hesitant to leave it out. I don't want them to feel, somebody raises their hand and they're like, you're not talking about the vacancy. So again, it's finding that right middle ground where it's like we address it, so that it's not seen as though we're kind of like unaware or leaving it out or not up to speed on what's going on, but at the same time we're presenting it in a way that makes sense. Layla.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on what Patrick said. The way that we've talked about this, the way it's discussed in our housing needs analysis too, is that we refer to it as seasonal, recreational, or occasional use, which is consistent with the census definitions. I do think we'll end up down a rabbit hole if we do start talking about it as, because traditionally when you think about vacancy, it's homes that are not being, homes that could otherwise be utilized, right? And that is not the case here. These are homes, and I think calling them second homes also a bit of a, they're third and fourth homes, fifth homes for some people. So I think I always kind of go with Occam's razor, right? The simplest explanation is the best one. And in this case, I think if you just categorize it as 76% are categorized as seasonal, recreational, or occasional use. And if the issue of vacancy comes up, we can talk more in depth about that. But that's more consistent with with what's actually happening on the ground. And just for the record, we have 259 properties licensed as short-term rentals. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable. Connie, let's, I'm gonna have you be the last comment on this before I move on to the slides, because I really want to show you what we're gonna ask the public to do around housing and housing development. So, and give Marcy plenty of time. So go ahead, Connie.
I think the word vacancy is loaded in a negative way along the lines of what Layla just said. If we say occupancy rate, it's a little bit easier for me. Second homes are important to this community because there are many retirees who end up using their home as their primary home eventually, like us. And it wasn't vacant when we didn't live here. It just wasn't occupied full time. So it's the way you talk about it, and vacancy is a bad word.
Mm-hmm. Do we like the word available better? Like
Yes.
occupied versus available? Because we could probably,
Yes.
Parse those out. Okay, that was very helpful. Thank you. All right, let's go on. So for the activity, what we want to have is maps around the room on tables where people can use the map to record their ideas. We usually give them stickers and markers. For this activity, and I want to say at the beginning, this is the type of activity that we can replicate. We can see how it goes for this first one. It's something that we've done many, many times at a lot of our meetings. But so we can also implement this same design as we change topic areas, as we move forward through the different phasing of the project. So again, the room would be divided into groups, probably no less than 4 people, no more than 8, 9, or 10. And we want them working on collaboratively around a map. For this first event, we would ask people to be considering historic preservation, open space, and areas for housing development. Mainly, we're looking for those new middle housing types that Marcy's been talking about. And for those of you who were able to attend Planning Commission and City Council last month, she gave a wonderful presentation on that, and the video is available if you were not able to make that. And then, so yeah, this design can be replicated. So we've made up a map, a paper map that'll be on the table. And when people are working on their map as a group, we want them to consider 3 things. Where should housing development occur, and which type of housing development should occur there, right? So it's the what type and where of these middle housing types, like cottage homes. And Marcy will go into that in a second, but we're going to have people with stickers. We're going to ask that kind of which of these types should be used in Manzanita, should be developed in Manzanita, and where should they go? And then with the markers, we're going to ask them to mark out areas for parks and open space, areas that should be preserved for either as open space or as a historic element. Yeah, Connie.
With all due respect, I think this is a distraction because of the way Manzanita is laid out and available lots now. We don't have places for parks and open spaces to be located. We don't have other buildings that we could preserve historically in the city limits. I understand how you would do this in certain communities, but I think in our community, you should take a different tact, more like we did 2 years ago with Envision Manzanita, where, or even with the survey, what's going well, what do you want to preserve? That's appropriate to our community. I don't think this mapping activity is appropriate to our community, but I'm one person, so others can argue with that.
Okay, well, that's important to hear. Never be shy to say you feel like something's missing the mark. That's what we're here for. So let's maybe get through the rest of the activity, because I do think that the Envision Manzanita, the idea of kind of like the big ideas, what do you want to preserve? At some point, we have to look at a map and decide where things are going to go over the next 20 years of development, right? So, you know, I do think this is helpful, but let's get through the presentation on what the event is, and then I have a whole chunk of time set aside for discussing it. So for the mapping activity, we would be giving people 8 different kinds of housing stickers. Or this is how it's designed. These are the different housing types that are available. And Marcy, is this, let me remember, yeah, is this a good time for you to explain through the different types?
Yes, this is a good time.
And Marcy, can I jump in before we go just to clarify one thing?
Yep.
So these stickers are, you know, people, I don't want people, and we'll be very clear about this, but when we get into activity, I don't want people to think that they're making a decision for a property owner. You know, they would, and you know, just because you put a sticker on someone's property doesn't mean that property has to be changed to a plex. Maybe you put the plex down and draw a circle around and said, this general area is a good area for row houses, townhomes, something like that. So we have to be very explicit in when we explain the game, because people jump just to the conclusion, well, we can't put anything down because we're already developed here, or we don't have room for parks. Well, maybe there's an area that could change to a park, or
Yeah,
maybe anyway, so I'm just saying,
yeah,
kind of gotta throw the
perfect.
rules out the window.
Perfect, because you do people get very timid about putting stickers on top of other people's homes. And so, and rightly so, I think that feels odd. But so one of the ways that I've explained it in the past is, if that property came up for sale and somebody bought it, what would you want them to build there? What do you think makes sense there? And so I'll let Marcy explain more kind of what information from the public she needs to hear in order to do her work, and what she's kind of hoping to engage around, and then we'll have a much bigger discussion about the activity.
Great. So if we could go to the next slide. I just want to explain how the legislation that the state passed for Oregon and then for Tillamook County affects us, and what around the housing issues. So I've divided these housing type icons into 2 sets. There's the ones that you have to do, and there's the ones that you want to do. And I gave a good presentation, I should say a robust presentation about this. I'm going to keep it shorter than the one that I gave to the Planning Commission. I think there are a lot of people here today who are in the Planning Commission. And if I'm missing anything, you think I've stepped away from something that's important, please jump in and I'll go over it. But on the left here are kind of the really broad range of middle housing types. And middle housing is just by definition, it's the housing types that fall between a single dwelling on a lot sitting detached, surrounded by a yard, and an apartment building full of flats on multiple levels. It's the housing that falls in between those 2 types, which we used to have in cities all over. In an earlier time, it was very common, the kind of housing called middle housing, but for various reasons, like parking requirements or restrictions and segregation of multi-family housing that occurred post-World War II, we basically eliminated the possibility for middle housing. Now we're bringing it back, and in fact, state legislation is mandating to some extent. The housing types that are required by House Bill 2001, which I think you're probably all familiar with that term now. But also Senate Bill 1051, which was earlier passed regarding accessory dwelling units. We are required to find places for accessory dwelling units. You already allow that. Duplexes, I think you also already allow those, but also triplexes, quadplexes, cottage clusters, and townhouses. And we will need to, well, let me just go through the bullet points. So the Senate Bill 1051 requires all cities with a population greater than 2,500 to permit ADUs. And along with this comes a no restriction on parking, no restriction through design review, and no owner occupancy requirements. So we may be changing a few things about your zoning code regarding ADUs. And then House Bill 2001 requires medium and large cities to have duplexes on every lot that currently requires or permits a single dwelling. And then on larger lots, like over around 7,000 square feet, to allow triplexes, quadplexes, cottage clusters, and townhouses. And you may wonder, well, that was 2001 House bill, that's for large cities. How does this affect Manzanita? But it does through Senate Bill 406, which treats Tillamook County cities the same as medium to large cities in House Bill 2001. So these are the have to do's, and
Yeah.
I
Mark, do
see
we
a
have
question.
a question from Linda.
Linda.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify, Manzanita does not allow ADUs at this time. Did I hear you say the opposite?
Yes, sorry, I did learn that, but
Okay.
that is, yes. Thanks for reminding me, Linda.
Sure.
Next, the next slide then shows the things that I had heard going into the Planning Commission that people might want to do. And so these would go above and beyond what you're required to do per Senate Bill 406. And then I even heard some additional ideas as a result of the Planning Commission. So this list has grown a little bit longer, but let me just go through. And I'm saying, I'd like to say that the opportunity to rewrite your development code, your ordinance for housing, it's a good chance to get the housing that you have to do and want to do at the same time. So we're happy to build these want to do's into the list. Some want to do's examples are some cottage cluster alternatives like classic street cottage, for example. That doesn't meet the statutory requirement of House Bill definition of cottage cluster. So we want to and I do believe we want to make that type of housing possible in Manzanita. There's also other housing types such as narrow lot homes or single room occupancy or tiny homes. I'll just say right here that I heard support at the Planning Commission for narrow lot homes. So we've added that to the list. Common green standards, which are built into the requirement for cottage clusters. I'll go into cottage cluster formation in another slide, but just imagine that the common green standard is a shared open space, kind of a petite open space that's shared by homes. And it seems that there's interest in allowing that, or maybe even in some cases requiring that type of common open space for housing other than just a cottage cluster, but maybe other kinds of housing. Alley standards and skinny street standards be part of our amendments as well, because those help middle housing exist. There's also interest in looking at maybe up to 3-story apartment buildings. These are sometimes referred to as woody walk-ups, and also small-scale mixed-use buildings, such as the project that you have at 3rd and Lanita. So these are all the want to do's, some of which we have added to the list. Next. I'm going to go through these quickly, each of the have to do housing types, just so people can be clear. And as I go, I'm going to explain what some of the statutory requirements are. But I'm also going to talk a little bit about the tenure, because when we're talking about housing availability, like we were just talking about, it's really important to think about these different housing types and how they serve different demographics, different stages of life, different affordability. And so when we're considering affordability, tenure is very important. Which of these housing types lends themselves to being rented or owned? And that's changing because almost anything soon will be condominiumizable. So ownership may be much more flexible than it has been in the past. But let's start with townhouse. I'm drawing these illustrations that are on the slides from a new book that we just published. It's the second edition of the Housing Choices Guidebook, and I hope we'll provide a link and you'll go to the website at DLCD and download it. We have a couple of your own developments in Manzanita in this book, and I'm drawing upon the examples that we've used in the book to get to some of these ranges. The townhouse density can be extremely varying from 20 dwelling units to 45 dwelling units per acre. Those resemble, apartments, but these are actually ownable lots, little houses. They are not always so little, but the lots can be 1,800 to 2,500 square feet per the House bill. And the name of the House bill is Townhouse, not Row House. And these are attached, sitting on their own lots. They share at least one common wall with an adjacent unit. And this is a housing type that's typically owned, although an owner may rent it then. Next. Some illustrations from the guidebook to show how the wide range of townhouse shapes and sizes that we see. And one of the things we are hoping to get out of the mapping exercise is more information about where do you think these types are appropriate. Next. Another have-to-do housing type is cottage clusters. These are 5 to 35 dwelling units per acre. The lot size can be 20, as very small. You could have a cottage cluster on an infill lot, but you could also have a cottage cluster on a lot that's much more spread out, maybe on the edge of your urban growth boundary. The statutory name per House bill is cottage cluster, and the definition by the House bill is that at cottage clusters, no fewer than 4 detached housing units with a footprint of less than 900 square feet average and must have a common courtyard. So these can be owned and rented, especially if we make it possible for them to be on their own lots. They could be owned very easily. And you might see some characteristics in that third bullet that are somewhat restrictive, and that would be the goal for us in Manzanita producing a set of amendments that allows a little bit more flexibility in addition to meeting the House bill requirement. Next. A couple of examples again from the guidebook. On the lower left, you'll recognize that as classic cottages, but there's also a cottage cluster in Florence, the one on the upper left, for example, that is a really good example of affordable housing project built by a community land trust. And that allows these cottages to be owned and for the owner to benefit from appreciation and some equity creation, wealth creation. And yeah, the community land trust keeps the sales price somewhat steady over time so that other people can afford it. And this housing type does lend itself to affordability. Next. So you're all familiar with ADUs. And again, these can vary greatly in density. It's typically doubles the density of the base zone. And these also can be, they just basically sit on the same lot as a house. So we've seen ADUs that double the density of a 14,000 square foot lot, but also ones that double the density of a 1,500 square foot lot. So these are typically rented because they, the primary dwelling belongs to a person and the accessory dwelling unit is rented. But if any of you follow, like I do, all of the movement in the small dwelling unit world, you may know that condominiumization of ADUs is a hot topic right now, and people are pursuing legislation that would make that easier in Oregon. Next. Some ADU options again from that catalog are, the one on the lower left is actually interesting. It's just up in Seaside, and it's a garage that was converted. The entire garage was de-automobilized and made into a dwelling, and it's all on one level, accessible, pretty sizable unit that provides one more available dwelling for the city of Seaside. Next. Another dwelling type is plexes. I'm lumping triplexes, quadplexes, duplexes all into a single category here, but the House bill does make a distinction between those types. And as I mentioned earlier, duplexes must be permitted on every lot that today allows a single dwelling. And then on larger lots, triplexes and quadplexes must be permitted. We say larger, meaning it's typically the break is 7,000 square feet. Although a city could choose to allow triplexes and quadplexes on smaller lots. These are rented and owned. They come in all different configurations. They could be stacked on top of each other. They could be side by side, attached on their side. They could be separated across a property. They're rented and owned. So it's an extremely flexible housing type. And when I look around at middle housing that's been built within the last 4 years, the most common kind I see is this is a form of plex. Next. Therefore, we have some really great examples in the guidebook. On the upper left is a project in Newport that, because of no parking requirement, it's a workforce housing project, but each of these is a detached dwelling with 2 dwelling units in it. So it's basically a cluster of duplexes, and it's affordable, and it's right in Nye Beach, and it helped solve a small part of their workforce housing shortage. But on the upper right is a very traditional house-like development that's a series of triplexes and duplexes. On the lower right is a really interesting project in Madras that is for people aging. It's all on one level. These were prefabricated units that were brought to a site in Madras on church property. So another thing that made this development possible is the a Senate bill that allowed churches to use their property for housing. Next, I think that's the end of my little primer on the housing types. Are there any questions? All right.
So the concept would be, we would have the map that you saw. We would give people, kind of 8 different stickers around those types. And as Marcy pointed out, some of these are required to allow. And so the question then becomes where, right? And so that's where the map becomes relevant, where we're asking people, okay, here are some types that you're now required to allow by law. Where does that make sense in Manzanita? And then the ones that are the wants that that's for the community to let us know which of those there's an interest or which of those that they would want, and then if you do want them, where. So again, we're not asking people to place every single sticker. We're not pegging this to any number of like, you need to produce X amount of housing. It's really about kind of addressing these 8 different types of middle housing, looking at the ones that you're required to allow and where we want them, looking at what else might you want to allow. And again, very much this is about allowing. This is, if somebody bought this property, what would you want to allow them to do with it, in terms of, and where do these things make sense? Where do plexes make sense? Where do a little more density make sense? So we give people packs of stickers. We let them go to town on it, putting their stickers down. And again, we have markers. There'll be color-coded markers around parks and open space, historic areas. And for historic, I want to make clear to the public, to you guys and to the public, that's not just buildings that can be that qualify to be on a register. That's what is culturally and historically significant to you as a community in Manzanita, and what do you want to see preserved? And so each of the maps We have markers and stickers, and then each of the maps has a big square in the corner along the legend that says big ideas, and people can mark down narratives. They can write comments. We'll give them pens. They can do that as well. And then at the end, we ask that each table appoint a volunteer presenter, and the table stands up and they hold up their map, and it's ask them to say, what did you do with your map? Where did you put these things? What decisions did you make? And why, right? What were the motivating factors? What were the big goals or visions that you had for Manzanita? What are you most concerned about? What was really driving your decision making? And they can tell us, was there consensus at the table? Was there, what were the different interests that were having to be kind of debated and weighed? And so that, let me just see if I have one more. Yeah, so then we'll have markers for open space and for historic. And when they present out to the room, I think I got ahead of myself. We asked them, what were your motivating factors? What were the trade-offs that you discussed at your table? And what did you ultimately decide as a group? So we have time to discuss this. We also have time. Sorry, I'm going to make everybody dizzy flipping back and forth. The next things on the agenda are for you guys to give us some updates, but I see so many hands that I'm actually going to say we should just pivot and take the discussion on the mapping and the activity first, and then leave time for the updates from you guys before we adjourn.
And I could jump in real quick, Violet. I just wanted to say that you mentioned we've done these a lot. I've done, I don't even know how many similar things. They're always different. Topic areas are different. Stickers are different. The cities are different. But the time that people spend at the table with their fellow community members is pretty amazing, because that's not your self-selected group. So you might have very differing opinions than someone across the table from you. And so it's interesting to see that interaction and compromise and actually learning happen. And I get a lot of praise from the folks that go through this type of process in terms of, thank you for giving me a map to put my ideas down. Now, then again, those results or what they say could vary from, some people I could see someone holding up a map with not a sticker on it saying, I don't want any of this stuff in my community. That might happen. You might have one table that says, look, I put these houses here and here, and this is a great spot. So you do get a wide variety of opinions, but that's the whole reason we do these things. So anyway, let the conversation begin.
Scott, you may recall there was a Oregon city that will remain nameless that someone, one table stood up and all they put down were green stickers for parks. They just covered the entire thing. And they were like, we're trying to make a point, right? We have something we were trying to say, and we're going to say it with these stickers. So again, I'm just going to go from the top. Rick.
Yeah, so what I'm not getting about the exercise, which looks like a pretty interesting exercise, is there a goal? Are we trying to add 57 new dwelling units in the city of Manzanita? So my stickers need to add up to 57. I don't understand. I'm just putting stickers on a map. And is there any more guidance on parameters around what you're looking for in terms of an answer?
That's an excellent point. And I see Patrick nodding as well. That's an excellent point. We have done this activity that's kind of, something that is in our toolbox that we use on a lot of projects. We have done it. You can peg it to say, okay, look, your forecast for the next 20 years says, your housing needs analysis says you need X number of units. And so we've given you enough stickers to create those units. Where do they go? I don't think that makes sense for this. I don't think we need to get very tied down to the numbers. There is no sort of like winning this. I will say in the city of Canby, where they were also doing a UGB expansion at the same time, there was a real question of space. Where is stuff going to go? And we had a very strict forecast, and we had to try to say, hey, try to match your forecast. I don't think that makes sense. What's most helpful for this project that we hear from the public is of these different types of housing, these types of development. Usually when we peg it to a number is when we're just looking to balance, say, say employment land or industrial land and housing land, right? And so then we're trying to say, okay, you need to do a certain number of acres of employment land and a certain number of acres of housing and try to do those trade-offs. Here, we're less concerned about those trade-offs and more concerned at this moment about finding out which of these types makes sense of the menu of 8. Which makes sense in Manzanita, and if they do make sense in Manzanita, where do you envision them going? And that doesn't mean, we want to see this house knocked down. It means, this intersection or along this corridor or in this part of, that it makes sense to have it in a particular area. So right now we're looking a lot on what and where and less on how much.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Linda.
Marcy, do you have a point on that to answer that question?
I did just want to clarify that for some housing types, we don't have a choice. ADUs and duplexes have to go on every lot that today allows a single dwelling. And quadplexes, and row houses also, but cottage clusters and quadplexes, triplexes go on 7,000 or over square foot lots. The things that people said they want to do, like Third and Lanita, a neighborhood commercial with residential above, or a woody walk-up type of development like some of you on Planning Commission have been seeing proposed. Or if people wanted quadplexes outside of the 7,000 square foot area, like in other smaller lots, because there's a certain density or certain housing types make sense there. It's those above and beyond things that we want to know where's appropriate. I mean, people talked a lot about courtyard apartments and woody walk-ups and said, we'd like this type of housing in Manzanita somewhere, not everywhere, the somewhere. It's that somewhere we want to know. Where do you think that should be?
So, okay. Since you said my name, I'm going to go. One of the slides that I really appreciated in Marcy's presentation to the Planning Commission was the one where you talked about the stages of life activity and that I found that really illuminating and helpful to sort of shake me out of my own, well, I'm at this stage of my life right now, so that's kind of what I'm focused on. And I'm trying to think of ways that we can soften the NIMBYism response. And I don't know if other people would find that kind of information helpful, but again, just sort of open your mind and think about, we hear people say, well, it'd be nice to have younger people live here. Well, what do younger people need to live here? And maybe that kind of information would be useful to the community to open their minds to this exercise. Just my thought.
And that could be something that we can add back into this presentation before we give it to the public. Yeah, John.
I had a couple comments. I love the idea of the map.
I'm sorry, I have two.
This is
Did I jump in? I'm sorry. Go
Yeah,
ahead,
no. Either one.
Go ahead, John.
Okay. I mean, I'm predisposed to maps just because of, my last 50 years. But I'm a little concerned when you throw it out to the public or our citizen group that 8 different types of housing might muddy the water a little. If we could somehow simplify that, maybe to multifamily I think everybody in town gets the cottage cluster concept, but, courtyard multifamily could be sort of a similar thing. And then townhouse and duplex, triplex, quadplex. We have a bunch of duplex, triplex, quadplexes in town, which are basically townhomes by the chart that we've got. So maybe if we could somehow get that from 4 down to, or 8 down to 4, it might help whoever's moderating the map group And maybe you could do a little interim explanation without having to get a fistful of stickers of different colors.
So maybe just take out, if
and-
I'm hearing, go ahead.
Well, I have the second point would be, are you going to somehow give a base map with information on it, like where it is available to do some of these things? I mean, a large portion of the town has single family units on it, which may be right for ADUs when possible and that sort of thing. And then there are urban growth areas and other vacant infill lots like the Heron's Nest that lend itself to cottages or you know, a multifamily of some sort. So anyway,
John, you're
whatever
right.
leg up we can do with the base map going in would help, I think.
Yep.
Yes, and I can go back to sharing that screen if necessary, but you're right on all the conversations we've been having. The base map generally has constraints on it in terms of slopes and wetlands and things like that. We put streets on it. We also put parcels, and we've been discussing with Marcy, making sure that lots over a particular size maybe have a distinction on the map, right? Whether it's a texture, you know, hashes or something to say, hey, this is an area where the lot size would fit the requirements for certain types of units. And it may also be, what I'm hearing is maybe Marcy's point and your point, I think, kind of go together, which is some of these things have to be allowed everywhere. So maybe why give them a sticker? And if we use the stickers for the things that are available but not required, then we could limit the number of stickers and just streamline the process a little bit to
Yeah.
your concern,
I love
and
that.
then get down from the 8 and to just the ones that are more the want to. Yeah, the 4s that are the
Completely
want
agree. And I
tos.
think Marcy just held up 4 fingers. I think
Yeah,
that's
I
the
saw
right
it. I saw
number.
it.
Yeah,
She
I agree.
fed me the number. So yeah, so exactly
Kicked you under
that.
the table. I like that.
Yeah, so again, we work on getting what information, and there'll be a very detailed legend on the map. What I love about these paper maps, I actually told somebody recently on another project, I said, you know, the flimsier the paper, I'm happier because I want people messing up that map. I want people writing on it. I don't want people feeling formal. I don't want people feeling nervous. I want them drawing, writing, placing stickers, talking, and just really taking ownership of that map. And again, it's my job to make sure, or Scott's job, whoever's standing at the front of the room, to make sure that they understand we're not talking about knocking down anybody's home. We're not talking about requiring, other than the mandatory things that we have to require on the zoning, but we're talking about what would we allow a homeowner to do? Would we allow them to build something like that there? And so again, it's about allowing certain developments and where would you like to see them within Manzanita? So other questions? I thought there were a lot more. Yes, go ahead, Patrick. I'm gonna go to you next. Sorry, John, that
Yeah,
you
just
got moved from that one little window where I'm calling on people.
no problem.
You're next.
Yeah, I guess
Patrick.
just to bring full circle a lot of good ideas that I think have come out with respect to what we're going to be putting in places. You might want to break it down into something super simple, which is multifamily 1 through 4, or duplex, triplex, quad, and multifamily, you know, and cottage and apartments, you know, like multifamily 5+, you know, like something like that. Like, because the simpler the better. And with this, if you haven't worked with, one thing I've learned working with folks in Manzanita is that words matter. And if you leave something vague, you can lose a half meeting with trying to explain a word or a concept. So the simpler, the better. I would
I'm in trouble.
say
Scott, you
I
have to
would
do
s-
it. I'm in trouble.
I would say that in your slide with the map, it was interesting that you kind of put it in terms, once again, to make it simple. It says middle housing. What are the options for middle housing? And I would just humbly suggest saying middle housing and multifamily housing, so that people can kind of visually go, oh, I get that. I don't need to know what middle housing is, because I'll tell you what, if you Google it, you can get two different definitions of middle housing, and you can get one that excludes apartments and one that includes it. So just if you're really trying to get a feel for what the community wants in this whole range, which includes what you all started with in state specific HB 2001 language, and adding on what the planning commission put on, which is really super smart. I think that's incredible. It's important. And then I do want to kind of address something that Marcy said, and I think something that's overlying this whole thing, and it's probably going to come up when we get to the community. She says we don't have a choice. Um, this is an important idea if we're going to try to get to a solution for affordable housing in Manzanita. The point number 10 is called housing. And I think my understanding of that is we're trying to get affordable housing so that we can get our young folks into this community, so that we can get folks who can help out our businesses and work and afford to live here. Um, Although HB 2001 says we have to change planning codes, that is true. The minute we do that, and we can change it on 100% of the map, it doesn't, just because you build it, it will not come. The fact that we change a building code doesn't make it affordable. And I think what's really making me slightly nervous is if we do what House Bill 2001 says, and we create middle housing by just changing building codes, we have done what we've been told to do, but we haven't necessarily come up with a solution to creating affordable housing. And I think if we're really on a team of people that's supposed to be coming up with a comprehensive plan for 20 or 30 years, I hope that we are looking for the solutions to providing affordable housing for our younger generation and for our workforce, in addition to satisfying what House Bill 2001 said, because we're in a very unique community. I know you guys have done this a bunch of times, but I'm not sure if you've dealt with many communities that are less than a square mile in size and have more houses than residents. If you look in most cities, it's the opposite. You have typically more residents than houses. We're the flip. Our issues are completely different than things you're going to run into. And so I hope we're all on the same page, and I hope we're prepared for what's going to come at us in a community meeting.
Yeah, Patrick, I think those are excellent points. I know I keep saying that, but I'm actually feeling like this is a really good conversation that we're having around this. What I'm hearing, and again, I want to kind of let you know what I took from that and see if I got it right, is that while we do have to focus on Marcy's work with updating the code, the ordinances, we're also writing a comprehensive plan. We're also writing a housing chapter, and not all of it is going to be about middle housing, and not all of it is going to be about that work. And some of that goes more into some of the stuff that Scott and I work on, which is, again, housing strategies. A lot of things go into that chapter that are not about just the what and where, and just about code. So I think what I have to do is add some slides in that connect that work, right? So we're updating the comprehensive plan, that's going to include strategies. It's going to include mapping. It's going to include some of it. It's going to include Marcy's work as well. And while that's the most immediate, when we get around to actually writing this comprehensive plan, we're going to need to include some more things around housing.
I guess to Rick's point, he said, what are we trying to accomplish? I'll be honest with you, I'm a little confused about if housing 10 is in the first group, and housing, in the first group, we're supposed to be doing this by year end. I am at a loss to be able to share with people who ask me, are we really trying to get multifamily housing, apartment housing, and middle housing all taken care of for the comprehensive plan by 12/31? It sounds it
No,
sounds like that's
so
going to be unlikely to accomplish, but that's what kind of our little slides seem to project.
yes, very good point. The DLCD grant on updating the middle housing code wants the adoption ready code amendments by the end of the fiscal year in June. So we're starting with that work now. The comprehensive plan chapter on housing is not going to be done in that time because we're not really writing all of that housing strategy until we talk about economic development, we talk about land use, we talk about infrastructure, we talk about, so again, those chapters all speak to each other and rely on each other. So we're meeting with the public around this. Their best use now for the information that we need is to find out this middle housing and what do you want to see and where do you want to see it? I know I keep repeating that, but that's really what we need to hear from them this fall. We will continue to work and continue to discuss housing strategies and housing policy. That's about how do we incentivize things? How do we encourage different developments? How do we work with developers? All of those ideas that aren't necessarily the what and the where are things that are going to be discussed through the entire comprehensive plan process, which goes on for another, at least another year and a half.
And last thing, and then I'll
That
stop hogging
helpful?
and give it over
No,
to give it
no,
over to
it's fine.
John.
But was that
If-
helpful?
It's actually very helpful, and it's kind
Okay.
of the first time I've felt like I have a sense for how the middle housing is kind of mapping to number 10. They've been kind of disjointed for me. Finally, if you want to get something out of this meeting about where people are using the map, you might want to think about it, like maybe we flip it and go, where do you not want certain types of housing? Where do you not want apartments? Where do you not want cottages? And where do you not want multifamily 1 through 4, duplex, triplex, versus where do you want it? Just my 2 cents.
And I think sometimes we see people do that with their markers for preservation, in less of a kind of like, because we want to, as someone earlier mentioned, balancing the NIMBYism, we don't want to encourage people to just say, mark it off. But if they're saying like, hey, this is a section of Manzanita that feels historically, culturally, this feels like quintessential Manzanita to me, and I don't want to see it change in type. That is something that people can sometimes circle and say, hey, this is really the only way I see this neighborhood looking. Again, it could be replaced with a different single family home, or it could be replaced with whatever, but we don't want to see it change very much in character or type. John, would you, not John Collier. I'm calling. John, it is finally, you have finally moved into the square that I have decided is the calling on square.
I forgot what I was gonna ask.
Oh.
No, I'm kidding.
Oh, thank God.
I did though, for a little while. So the map that they're gonna put these stickers on, and all the stickers are for housing, right? But it sounds like in another project, they changed the sticker to open space and put them all over the place just to make a point. Is that?
Well, sometimes, again, sometimes like in the city of Salem, is an example. Scott and I did the Salem comprehensive plan, and we gave them a packet that was very specific to, you need X number of housing units,
Oh,
and we've given you, and that should be 60% single family. So we gave you 60% single family stickers, and we gave you 40% multifamily stickers, and we gave you X
okay.
amount of industrial and X amount of commercial, and X amount of parks
Okay.
in a packet, and was like, balance all of that out at one time.
Okay.
Sometimes that makes sense. But in this
Yeah.
project, we have 4 summits, and we're sort of phasing it. And we're also trying to tie in this middle housing work and what Marcy needs to know in terms of these different middle housing types. So we're not doing it that way where people are talking about, commercial and housing in general. We're not asking them to balance everything at once. We're asking them to look at
Yes.
housing and historic preservation and open space right now.
So for instance, if it was, the map's going to show color-coded open space, wetlands, parks, and a person could go, I want a cottage cluster on that park. I mean,
Yeah.
you're going to tell them you can't do that.
Well,
We don't actually.
yeah, we don't, because theoretically in the next 20 years, the ownership of that land could change, things could change. We want to see it, in some ways we're still in that visioning phase of we want to look
Okay.
out 20
And-
years. And what we do with those maps, which it might be very important to highlight, is we'll then digitize this. We'll then we'll stack them and say
Okay.
what pops, right? Where is there consensus? What intersections do we have a lot of the same stickers being
Okay.
placed? So it isn't like, again, we're not going to take one map and say, oh, these people did it great, we're just going to go with that. We take them, we digitize them, and it tells a story, right? What are the ideas out there? What are people envisioning? And is there a place where there is enough consensus that, like, if I put all the stickers and kind of do a heat map of of Woody walk-ups or whatever, where is there, are they really clustered in one place? Is the
Okay.
community telling us that there's some sort of consensus around that? And that
No
gives
matter
us some
what.
information.
No matter what, even if it's mostly parks over there, they've all massed over there,
Yeah. And John, we have to do that kind of, because if we told everyone, like, if they had to play with the rules of reality, they probably wouldn't be able to do anything, frankly. If we said, this is a
Right.
zone, you're allowed to put this here, so we kind of got to say, you're king for a day, do
Okay.
whatever you like. And then when we take it as professionals, kind of filter out the stuff that would never really work anyway.
Okay. That kind of answers my question, because the map looked pretty generic. It was just gray.
Yeah.
I mean, and it looked like you could just go all out and put it, you put a bunch of housing right down Lanita, which
Yeah. Well, we usually have, it may be hard to see, but we usually have like the
Air photo.
yeah,
I
like
think
the
it's
aerial.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like the Google kind of
Yeah.
Earth aerial. And then we have all the streets, and then we have the parcel little blocks out so people can see, like, oh, that's one big parcel, or that's whatever. But again, one of the things we're trying to come up with when you write a comprehensive plan is that going to stay a park? Right?
Right.
Are we changing our ordinance? Are we changing what's allowed on this land? So we don't want people to work under the existing rules, because we're trying to rewrite the rules. We're trying to decide what the rules should be. So we kind of need to give them a blank slate and say, what do you imagine? What makes sense?
So I have to do a really good job at that at the beginning, because that's super important when you get to the meeting. Because if you don't explain that there are no rules and you're king for a day, I would like to say that, king or queen for a day, or whatever you want to be. There are no rules. We have to just kind of let people lay out their ideas and think big.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even though
John.
something might not be feasible at all.
Right. Okay. Broad brush.
Well,
Yeah.
and that's a delicate balance, I'll be honest. It's something that I struggle with, because you want to, again, let people imagine. But then at the same time, they don't want to put things down and that don't make any sense. Nobody wants to put something down and then be told it didn't make any sense, right?
Right.
So that's why we give them like slopes, wetlands, natural constraints. We give them a certain amount of information that allows them some parameters to feel like their decision is based in some amount of reality. But what we're not going to give them is zoning, and we're not going to tell them, don't put a park down if there's a house there, or don't put a house down if there's a park, because again, we're looking 20 years out.
Or don't put a house there if it's zoned commercial, or don't put a house there if
Right,
it's
or whatever,
industrial.
because we're trying to decide, do the rules match what people want and what
Okay.
makes sense? And if we go to rewrite the rules, which one should we rewrite and what should we make them say? So we need to let people kind of play. But
Yeah, big
certain
picture.
things like slopes, certain things that that are logical, we put all that down, and we have a nice legend where you can really see the different colors and the hash marks and the, like, oh, okay, well, that's you know, that's in a floodplain or that's in this. And so people can use a certain amount of information to make their decisions. So it feels useful. It feels valuable.
Right.
And we're not just going to throw it all out because it's like, oh, haha, you were in a floodplain, right? Like we have to, you know,
Yeah.
we want to get useful information.
There's gotta
And
be
so,
some boundaries. Yeah.
yeah, so we put some boundaries
many.
down there. But again, we don't want people, we're asking them to come on an evening after work and sit and listen to a presentation and then put some stuff down on the map. We want them really not worried too much about exact acreage or exact numbers or zoning. We want them just really thinking, hey, when I drive down the street or I live in this neighborhood and I walk here, you know, what makes sense.
It is really funny though to watch these groups, John, because this comes up in the discussion. You're sitting around a table with 8 people and someone says, well, you can't put that there because that's a park, or you can't, you know, and then
Right.
some other people are like, yeah, you can do whatever you want. They told us we don't have any rules. So it's interesting. They kind of, the group dynamic and group discussion while working over these maps leads to logical solutions, you know?
Okay. All right. That helps. Yeah, I appreciate that.
All right, John Collier.
First, I want to reiterate what Scott and Violet both said. John, it's again, I've done a bazillion of these. You're always more successful if you put few or no rules on the discussion. And if there's a moderator at the table, you know, maybe they can steer a little and keep them out of the wetlands. But other than that, my recommendation is no rules.
Right.
But what I really wanted to say was to jump on Patrick's point is where we need as a group to kind of make sure we understand what our goals are. Marcy has a mandate to make sure we follow the state laws and don't do anything that gets us in hot water with the state. We want to be good little coastal citizens and do exactly what the state wants us to do. But our real goal, and it's bigger than housing, it's economic, and that is we want to have more, we want to have our commercial economy grow. And to do that, we need employees. And to do that, they have to have a place to live. So our goal, this whole middle housing thing is the state thing, but I think everybody's big global goal is to more housing that people that work for a living in Manzanita can afford to live in, or not just Manzanita. I know Layla really wants to look at the big picture regionally, and I completely am on board with that. I think, you know, this group needs to spread its wings and like look at what Nehalem's doing and Wheeler's doing and the county's doing in sort of the outlying areas, because we're pretty well, you know, we got a state park on the south, we got a big old blue ocean on the west, and we've got the county on the north. There's not a lot of room, there's not a lot of big areas to do a lot of things in, but the goal is to get more people living here. Manzanita will always draw the people that can afford to go to the restaurants and buy the tchotchkes and do the things that the businesses want to provide for them. Our you know, that's not going to go away because of our physical beauty, our weather, our environment. Every part of Manzanita just screams out to come. But we need, again, to focus. And so let's not get too much into the weeds about the state mandate, and let's keep the big picture in mind. And that is, we want people that work here to be able to live here.
Yeah, that's
I love that. Yeah.
I'm really glad
Down
that
off
you
my
made
soapbox, but
I'm really glad that you made that point. I think again, building on Patrick's point earlier, I think one of the things that we as a team need to do is not just, like I said at the beginning, that we'd be pulling some of the presentation slides from your last presentation, for the first one where we kind of said, this is what the project is, this is what a comprehensive plan is. We will be doing that, right? So I'm going to pull those slides from what we presented to you guys last time. I just didn't, it's not worth your time to go through them again, but we will go through that. What is a comprehensive plan? But I do think some additional slides on, what are some of the existing housing goals in the housing chapter that aren't necessarily connected to middle housing, but are about housing. And I think particularly as somebody who was a, advocate for senior housing for 10 years. And then when I did my planning work, took mostly economic development classes because that's fascinating to me and very important to my work. I think making sure that people understand that some of these housing policies connect with economic development, connect with the other chapters. And so we have a bit about how a comprehensive plan works and how all the chapters really go together. And I think thinking of some of the like kind of workforce housing and affordable housing and framing it a bit in that larger picture, I think is going to be really important. Connie.
I am wondering if in the mapping process, you address parking at all. Are there stickers for parking or parking lots?
No, there are no stickers for parking or parking lots.
No, there's
Marcy,
not,
do you want to
but, I
talk
mean,
parking?
There would be parking associated with these housing types, but we would just assume that. So, but that being said, there really are no rules, and you have a pen. If you want to draw a public parking structure, no one's going to stop you. So I think I don't think we explicitly have parking stickers or pieces, but if that discussion comes up in a group, I would love to have a group talk about parking for 10 minutes and write me some big ideas about how to deal with parking and maybe come up with a, shared parking thought for, the city. So
Well,
the
we
answer is-
need to address it at some point, maybe not at this stage.
Yeah.
But I've passed out my version of the questions
Yeah.
already, and I think I've passed out over 80.
Wow.
Received back, I don't know how many I've sent to Cody. I have a few more to send.
Awesome.
And one of the main themes is concerns about parking and a few other things.
Cool.
But not about middle housing, and that's fine. They don't know that it needs to be addressed yet.
Yeah.
But perhaps something should be said about parking at that first meeting, since it's such a big concern to so many people. You may want to speak to it a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Again, I think I'm going to jump in for a second because I think building on John Collier's point a minute ago in terms of like economic development and how this is all kind of related, as somebody who comes to Manzanita to, buy or comes to the coast to buy taffy and take my 8-year-old onto the beach and my Labrador and let her run. Parking, you have visitors trying to park at the beach, but you also have then if there is more density going in around housing, and then making sure that there's parking for people who are living there. So I think parking is attached to the conversation on housing. It's attached to the conversation on economic development. It's attached obviously to transportation, and land use, transportation, and economic development are definitely elements that are going to be discussed in each of the summits kind of coming up. I think we have land use and transportation in one, and then economic development after we start talking about coastal and beach, which would also have a question on parking. So I think parking is going to be relevant on each of these. So I don't think there's a chance that we'll necessarily have this meeting and not discuss parking, but I think we should set expectation that it won't be solved in this meeting, because again, it's attached to each type of use. Each type of land use has some sort of parking impact.
Marcy, did you have a follow-up?
But that's a good point, Connie.
On the parking? Oh, you didn't? Okay.
Not about parking.
Okay.
Connie, before I ask Linda for her comment, how do you feel about the mapping? You were concerned at the beginning. Are you still concerned that it's a distraction?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't think we're like the other places that you have mentioned so far. I lived in Hood River. Well, I'm 5th generation, but I lived there 40-ish years. And they addressed parking over a period of time. I now have a small place in South Portland, which has a wealth of variety in housing. And I understand some of the challenges. And there is no open land in the South Portland area where I live other than Willamette Park. So if an old house is pulled down, multifamily units go up, and that is great. But once again, parking's an issue at that point. That's why I brought it up, because it has been an issue as an aftermath with everything. But I totally get the mixtures. I totally get how certain areas on bigger streets get more multifamily. Areas in the quieter part of the neighborhood seem to retain single family or an ADU or maybe a duplex. I totally get all that. I don't think Manzanita fits that profile at all. Like Patrick said, it's about a mile by a mile. And unless you're going to pull down a bunch of houses, there's not a lot of available lots. So I don't really see how this exercise is going to be helpful. But I'm open to it. I will help host it. I'm skeptical.
That's okay.
This is not where you've been before. This is a little village.
Yeah. Understood.
Understood. Now, Linda, you're next, and then John, and then Linda, I wanted to make sure that you had adequate time. I think we have about 22 minutes left on our time to kind of report out to us any concerns from the committee or any issues that we as a team need to kind of address moving forward beyond the mapping exercise or the engagement exercise. So yeah, Linda, and then John, and then we'll discuss the committee's items.
Okay. Well, my question's quick. What are you asking of us? What do you want us to do at this meeting?
So that's a really good question. I would love to have, well, go ahead, Violet. I think.
No, you go ahead.
I mean,
You go
ideally,
ahead. Everyone's tired of hearing me. Go ahead.
There's a couple of things we can have you do. I mean, it'd be really nice to have you help with facilitation at the tables. So spread yourself out and just make sure that the conversations continue and follow kind of the things that we talked about today in terms of, there are no rules, or, let's think big, let's have a conversation together. Maybe start getting folks to start drawing and writing on maps. For some reason, no one ever wants to start doing that, but once it starts, it just kind of happens. So I mean, if you're comfortable being a facilitator at the tables, I would love to have that. Maybe we can have a list of folks who want to sign up to do that. And if you don't, that's fine too. If you want to participate, that would be great. So I think the other piece is that we would love to have you use your networks to get the word out to please come to the event.
Yeah.
Anything I missed there?
No, all I was going to say is, to us, a bad outcome is nobody showing up, not getting the information, right? So we need people in the seats. And then the second thing is we want people actively participating. So if you're interested in facilitating, we usually have some facilitator instructions. We go over it about 20, 30 minutes before the event starts. We just say, okay, each table, let's see if there's a staff person or a community person who wants to be a facilitator. The only rule about that is you got to be neutral, right? So you're just trying to facilitate conversation, make sure that what you're hearing people talking about is getting put on the map or getting written down somewhere, that information is being captured, that local knowledge is being captured so that we can use it. And just prompting people to move through the exercise, reminding them of how it works and things like that. And then having one of them, not the facilitator, stand up and report out at the end. But you're also all at the end of the day community members. And, I want to know what you think too, right? I want to know where you think it makes sense. So if you want to sit and put down stickers and say, hey, I live here and I want to participate. in this conversation, then that's also possible. And the rest of us can facilitate, other people, we have staff who can facilitate. And also it's set up that you don't necessarily need a facilitator. I mean, I think it's usually the instructions are pretty self-explanatory. So, I won't hesitate to add an extra map if we have enough people, even if we don't have a facilitator, because I'd rather get the map information from the public than worry about the facilitation piece. But yeah, so spreading the word, and then, coming to the event and either helping out, working the event or just participating. Yeah, John.
I just want to backtrack and sort of reiterate what Connie said about parking. And I don't want to, first of all, I don't want to get into the weeds, but I do want to make sure that as a group or as a community, we look at parking through a big picture lens. And let's not get in, we need 2 parking spaces per bedroom over here, or for this, we need parking. There are ways to look at parking, and Layla will jump all over this, and she's lectured me on it. But lots of different ways to look at parking. So just throwing it back out there that, we don't need to have all of our parking on Lanita. It's, as Patrick pointed out, it's a mile by a mile. Anybody can walk anywhere in this town. So
I'd just like to remind you of the 25% of people with some form of disability in this town, John.
Yeah, we're all old. I get it.
I'm not saying that lightly,
I
and
know,
I'm not saying it as a joke either. I think we have to be careful about all of our assumptions.
You are
in this
right,
area.
and I'm not.
Thank you.
I'm not suggesting we don't have any kind of accessible parking or don't have enough parking for people that actually need it. The point I'm trying to make is we need to look at parking as a global issue and not as a in the weeds issue, and kind of we can go to the weeds after we decide how we're going to look at parking from the the 10,000 foot level. Anyway, that was my only point.
Okay, thank you, John. Marcy, you had your hand up, and then Patrick, and then Connie, and then we need to have the last 15 minutes or so at least to hear some of the housekeeping items from Linda. I think I shouldn't say housekeeping items, but some of the items that are a little bit more addressing, making sure that you guys, again, away from the mapping exercise, and the big picture items, and more about making sure that whatever you guys need or have heard that we're doing that. Yeah, Marcy.
I just wanted to say that I didn't present anything this time about the benefit of middle housing, the benefit of housing choice. We didn't talk about the slides. We didn't include the slides that I included in the Planning Commission, including the survey, which I think, Linda, you mentioned, getting people kind of off of density and zoning and thinking more about housing choice, and how housing choice makes the community more resilient, and how it addresses some of these bigger picture questions like you were talking about, John. A resilient community is one that has many, many generations in it. That's economic resiliency. I mean, I do think, but I kind of like to hear what people who saw the Planning Commission presentation think. Should some of that information be presented to the public?
I would say yes.
Thanks.
Raise hands.
Nice, thank you. Okay.
Is there something that can be added in that conversation? I watched that conversation, and I mean, to me, housing choice is also about cost. That's one thing you didn't talk too much about. And we can build all these triplexes, but to cover the loan that it costs to build those is a significant amount, and it can't be covered by rent. So there's this disconnect for me about what you presented in planning in terms of what communities need and what we should be fighting for offering. But I don't see how people who work here can afford the types of housing, middle housing that you presented in planning. And that's not for today, but I think that's a disconnect. I would say if you're going to bring that up and go into detail about that, I hope you bring in, do you really believe that we can get these to be rented out at $1,500 or less or something like that? And if so, how?
Well, I do think it came up at the planning commission. People asked, they stayed just as you did, Patrick. We can zone these housing types, but that doesn't mean that we're going to get them, or that when we get them, they're going to be affordable. And we did touch on in the planning commission ways that middle housing make it possible for affordable housing organizations, nonprofits, to provide middle housing. If the land can be provided, it's a win for many of these affordable housing providers. Parking is also a huge expense for housing. It might be helpful to talk about how much that adds to the cost of housing and why we don't see affordable housing, largely because of the cost of providing parking. And when you don't require parking anymore, you see more affordable housing. But all of those things aside, you would have to make an effort. I'm hearing we will be building this into your comprehensive plan to attract and incentivize affordable housing. It's above and beyond what's going to be required in your development ordinance. And we could talk about that, but I don't know if the public is the right place to talk about that. I generally find some rules of thumb about that are really simple for people to understand about kind of that. You mentioned, Violet, 30% of your income, that if you're spending more than that, it's not affordable. What is workforce housing? What is affordable housing? There are actually different categories of housing. And what are we talking about here? Which types of housing tend to need government assistance to be built? Which kind of housing can actually be built by development if the development restrictions are not too great? I think it might be helpful to just give people a little rule of thumb so that the affordability context is built into what we're talking about. Do you think that would begin to address it? Patrick?
I'm probably an outlier in all this. I think we're all going to agree as a group and the people who show up that we all want affordable housing. The question of whether duplexes and triplexes and quads are affordable. It's easier to do affordable housing tax credits on multifamily housing, apartments, etc. I haven't seen it so much on duplexes, quads, and that's what you guys are focusing on in your presentations to planning. And that's, for me, the disconnect. And I don't know that in the meeting coming up, I think it makes more sense to kind of listen to the community and hear more about what they want to say rather than us kind of educating folks on different types of housing. That's just my 2 cents.
Great. Okay.
Connie, was that what you were going to say? I see a lot
I was
agreeing.
clapping for Patrick.
Yes.
If we don't give our neighbors a voice in the whole process, it will be a huge failure. If we just do mapping at the first meeting, I think we'll lose a lot of people. I would suggest you come up with one of your other ways that I'm sure you have of listening to their voices, whether it's sticky notes on a board or whatever, maybe at the beginning and after. What matters to you? Why are you here tonight? Some way of them expressing. You have a lot of retired people in this community who are passionate about living here versus somewhere else. And you can't just assume that they will be open to some of the great ideas you have and the great ways of teaching us that you have, because we're elders who think we know a lot already, or at least we have valid feelings. So you're going to have to address our feelings about things and use one of your toolboxes on that kind of thing at the very beginning, or people are going to shut down. I kind of know my neighbors.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. And we do have lots of things. I think the idea of sticky notes, often we have boards and people can leave sticky notes commenting so the board can have some various information and they can leave sticky notes. We have comment cards, online surveys, all kinds of things that we can do to get that information. So Linda, I wanted to, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, I think, so I don't miss any of the items that I was asked to kind of put on the agenda to make sure that you guys, any questions or concerns from the committee happen. Sorry, it started at the beginning, so we're going to have to.
That was it. That was right.
It was, and then I clicked a beautiful, helpful button that said, "Please start slideshow from the beginning."
There we go.
So here's my items that I was given. Again, I apologize for calling it housekeeping, but I know some of it was about the Google document and the share and creating maybe a shared folder as a library of documents for you guys to be able to access. Am I correct in some of that?
Yes. Yeah, I think Cody and I have actually made some progress on the shared drive. I have four things, and they are pretty much
Okay,
all.
go ahead. Yes.
First of all, real quick for the PASC members, we are on the agenda for Monday's Planning Commission meeting and Wednesday's council workshop to do a really brief, hi, we're here. This is what we're here to do presentation. And the intention originally was to put faces to names so that the community would know who we are. If they saw us about town, they would say, hey, you're on that PASC team. So I was curious who's going to be able to attend the Planning Commission meeting on Monday and the council workshop on Wednesday. Can we get a little show of hands, or who won't be able to? And I think Layla, I think we're up front on both of those meetings. So, and we're only going to do like 5 to 10 minutes. So it's not a huge time commitment. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're up front for city council, and then I have it following Marcy's presentation at planning commission. That's cool.
Okay, perfect.
I am out of
And then-
town, by the way, John Ryman.
Yeah,
I'm out of town next week, unfortunately. Pre-planned getaway.
All right. And these are Zoom if you have a free moment, but if you don't, that's totally fine. I understand.
Gotcha.
A question that you don't need to answer today, but I would appreciate getting some clarity on the intention behind the project website and how we can direct people where to go. I'm getting a little confused myself about what should I expect to find on the project website versus on the city website, what should be on both places. And it would just help me to talk with the community if I understood that better myself. Real quick and then we'll get to the community conversations tracking sheet, which has a tab for the stakeholders, a tab for businesses. And then I'm really unclear as to where we're tracking the individuals that we're talking with. How can we make sure that we're not 8 of us attacking the same person and leaving other people out? How do we denote progress that we've made with the people that we've selected on the stakeholder list? And then for the business list, if you want to charge people to glaze a window in Manzanita, you have to have a license. So that list is gigantic. And my feeling would be that I would like to break out our commercial core brick and mortar businesses for a higher and more intensive level of engagement than I would for the rest of the businesses. And I'd like to poll other people about their opinions on that. And how do we track that? I know the original spreadsheet had more information about addresses. I'm finding some gaps. There's a chunk of businesses that are all in the same location, and I thought it would make sense for me to just work with them all at the same time. I don't know who owns the Big Wave because of the way the business license names are. So unless I had the Big Wave's address that I could connect the dots and say, oh, that license must be the Big Wave owner. So work needs to be done on the businesses is what I'm saying. And I'm looking for people to help me with that. and also for clarity from the group as to whether focusing on that commercial core as a primary group makes more sense than all of the businesses. Thoughts?
I can help you with that, Linda, afterwards if you want. And I'll note this. I was starting to reach through some of the business owners, and I'm finding people in Astoria and I'm finding people in Seaside. My first take on that was, I think we take the whole list, and you and I and everybody else who wants to be a part of that takes it and cuts it down to Manzanita proper and those that support Manzanita, and maybe focus here. And then if we can get through this, get to the rest. But yeah, it was an unvetted list for sure.
For sure.
I think we need to be careful about brick and mortar versus not, because there are a lot of people out there that do services for the businesses and the people in the community that aren't necessarily brick and mortar. Contractors, subcontract, maybe some of the subcontractors, I don't know, landscapers. You kind of get the drift of the people I'm talking about. Chimney sweeps, window washers, whatever. But they have a stake in what we're talking about. So not just brick and mortar.
Right. So I know Patrick and I know Rick have expressed interest in this. If anyone else wants to work with us on scaling back that business list to who we think really are the key business stakeholders, I think that would be useful. But for 3J's point of view, how are we tracking individual conversations? When we're sending in data to Cody, where's it going? So we can, will we have access to that information?
Yes. So it'll all be compiled and it'll be available. And actually, one of the things that we'll do through this is as part of the comp plan, we're tracking all of the input that we receive through the process. And it'll actually be one of the deliverables it's not a memo, but it's a document that, looks at all of the outreach we did and kind of critiques ourselves on what worked and what went, what we could have done better. And we use that as part of the chapter 1 public involvement plan. So there will be periodically, there'll be sets of information, like we do a survey that'll be made available. Once we're done with the community conversations, we're going to compile all that and have some results that we will share back with the group, and it will become part of that final report for the comprehensive plan.
Okay. Do you want us to be tracking all of the people that we've left a questionnaire with, or do you just really care about the results?
We don't need to track that. I think that's an extra step, but we really just want to hear what the feedback is. So it would be interesting though, if you do say, or just give us a rough estimate of how many people you think you touched, that would be interesting.
Yeah. So
Linda?
Yes.
It's Connie. One of the concerns I have is I took the Envision Manzanita sheet and put the questions on the back. I made them briefer. I think I gave you a copy, but it's what I passed out at the membership meeting of the Pine Grove Community House. And with some, I included an envelope with a stamp on it and my P.O. box here in town. And then those that I have gotten returned, I've sent to Cody. I've scanned them or taken a photo and sent them to Cody in quote, in good faith. One thing that kind of bugs me is that was all at my own expense and initiative. And you 3J folks could really help us out in the future with future interactions with the community, with printing something similar. If Layla says, yes, this is what 3J needs to do for us, or if the city should. I don't think individual PASC members should be doing this, but I wanted to get the job done, so I did it. So could you folks amongst you, not amongst us, decide whether or not you're going to help us with some of the administrative stuff?
Printing. Okay. Yeah. We'll definitely add that. And then I want to respect anybody who needs to get off the call. It's now 4:00, and I want to give Layla a chance to address the group at the end. But I see Rick's hand up, so I won't forget that. But I just wanted to let Layla make a few comments.
Yeah, so absolutely, Connie. I think that's the kind of thing that with Linda as your chair, if there are administrative needs, postage, printing requirements, route that through Linda, and she can get in touch with Cody or I, and, you know, we can print that stuff. We have stamps at City Hall. So you absolutely shouldn't be. And so please, nobody go into your own pocket to do this stuff. Those are minor costs for us, and we did budget appropriately for this project. So if that's how you want to get outreach done and you're being creative about it, I commend you for that. But like, just take that extra step to ask for it, because nobody expects you to use your own money to do any of this. We're asking a lot of you just by your time. So so if I could just ask, yeah, just go through Linda or even just contact Cody directly, and then
Okay.
work together to make sure we can get your needs met. I wanted to address Linda's question about the website. That was my call, that we created a separate website that 3J manages, and that's for efficiency, because we use a third party to do all of our website management and things get lost in translation. So what we have it set up right now is that you can link to the website from our webpage, because most people go to the city's website anyway. So it's on the very front page, you click on it, and then it takes you to 3J's website. And that way, like Journey and Violet and others, when there's a change, they can just do that right away.
Mhm.
And then I just really quickly want to hit on this. It's a sensitive subject for me in a good way, but it came up a lot, and this is about housing affordability. And this comes up a lot. In 20 years in local government, I have heard from community members of all walks of life that there's an expectation that the city is responsible for solving the affordability crisis. We are partners in that, right? But we don't control the market. Like, bottom line, we don't control the market. But I try to hammer this in a gentle way, that there are ways, however, that we can influence the market. And the work that the state has required us to do, that Marcy is helping us through, is, so there's kind of 4 ways, I believe, and there's maybe more or less, that local governments in particular can impact the housing affordability market. And I think the city of Manzanita is certainly is doing 2 of these, could do a 3rd, and may end up doing a 4th. The first and the most critical is the regulatory framework. We have to set a framework that allows for housing choice and housing type. And that's what we're doing right now. And that's why the state passed this legislation, is because that is step 1, which is increasing the opportunity for housing type. And just by the numbers, right? The smaller the unit, the more affordable it is. We do have unique market conditions here. We do have a unique environment here. Our consultant team is well aware of that. And they understand that our market is very different than Nehalem, right? Even though it still blows my mind that our millage rate is a 1/3 of Nehalem's. Like, go figure that we have lower property taxes here, but that's a whole other story. The number 2 thing that we can do is incentives. Those can be through the regulatory framework, which Marcy talked about a little bit at the Planning Commission, but they can also be through, and these are policy choices that will come out of, once we finish goal 10, that the city council can start to entertain policies that may allow for additional incentives. We have already adopted one, which is the Affordable Housing Tax Abatement Program, which any private, nonprofit can apply for a 10-year tax abatement on properties that are affordable to people with 120% or less of area median income for up to 10 years. And that abates all taxes. So property taxes. So that's a big deal. So it's those kinds of incentives that the city can pass, but those are things that the planning process will help us get to, and that the city council will elect to take on. The 3rd is cash, which we don't really have. However, the county does have some cash, right? And so there's incentives that I'm collaborating with their housing folks there to see, can we use some of that cash to help offset the cost of system development charges, for example? And that can tie into incentives, right? We can use things like modified SDCs for affordable housing. Right now, we can't afford to do that because we need it for our infrastructure, but there may be other sources of funding that can offset that. And then there's straight up cash, which we just don't have to do that. And then the 4th thing that local jurisdictions can do is land. And that's where we can take our land and we can sell it at $0 or for a lower price in order to incentivize the development of income restricted housing. And so the city has a number of assets. Again, that's a council move, that's a policy thing. But those are things that we can do. But we're pretty much limited. And I think that that is actually an expansive and enormous amount of tools in our toolbox. But the number one thing that we have to do is get the regulatory framework set up right. And I'll say it, I've said it once, I'll say it again, and I'll say it again and again. And I learned this from Scott's dad, which is make what you want to have happen the easiest thing to do. And that's what our zoning ordinance has to do, because this affordable housing project that's coming in is going to have had to do a zone change. They're going to have to do a variance. You know, there's a whole bunch of things that have to get done in order for that to get built. And we want to make that the easiest thing possible. And so one of the outcomes that I think that we're asking for with this project, with this, with this activity, this map activity, is say, tell us where you want that above and beyond stuff in our community, because then that helps inform Marcy as to where to make those amendments in our regulatory framework to make that easy. Because right now it's wicked hard. So I just wanted to throw that in there. Thank you for your time and staying for an extra few minutes to let me be on my soapbox. But I do think that we do have the capacity to do a lot, but we can't do everything as much as we'd like to.
That was awesome, Layla. And all those 4 things can be policies and actions in your comp plan that then start to be your community.
Yeah, and it's exactly that slide that I think Patrick and John Collier were talking about. Hey, we need to connect the regulatory changes with the overall housing chapter and work that we're trying to do. Rick, you had another comment, and then I've left up the next steps. They're all things I think that you guys have already heard about, other than the fact that you should be hearing from us once we've had a chance to process all the things that we learned from the public at the end of this month. So maybe look for an email from us sometime mid-December to set up a next meeting so that we can talk with you guys again and let you know what we heard. Yeah, Rick.
So, quick comment. So Linda, you were bringing up really good points earlier, and I think we had to rush through those a bit. I would like it if the 7 PASC members and Catherine and John, to the extent that they're interested, get together as a unit to coordinate our outreach. That was the intent of the meeting that we had at the visitor center. That meeting got changed into something else. It was a good something else. But we've never come together as a committee and really coordinate our efforts. And I feel get on the same page. I think I'm guessing I'm not the only one that's a bit confused. And I think if we're united on this and have a single approach, we'll be so much more effective than where I feel I'm confused right now. And I just don't think there's any reason to be. We just got to get together and hammer it out.
I agree.
I know, Rick, you're leaving in about 10 days.
Yeah, that's right.
We wanted to try to coordinate something real quick.
If it can happen before, that would be wonderful. If it can't, understandable, but it would be great if it could happen before.
All right, that might be tough with our other 2 commitments for next week.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Okay.
Could we do it as a add-on to one of those commitments? If we only have to be present for a portion of those meetings,
Good idea.
just walk outside and
Okay.
do it after that.
The meetings are both virtual.
There's Zoom.
Yeah.
Oh, they're virtual. Thank you, Catherine. I forgot that.
Yeah.
Right.
And you have to, and that has to be, that has to be a public meeting, correct? That committee's meeting. That's the whole point of not having a lot of those meetings and trying to work things out through the network. Could you state just very clearly where we need clarity? Could you be more specific? It sounds, it's vague to me and I'm not sure I understand it.
Sure. So we had talked about, as a unit, kind of the business as an example, right? We want to go hit up the businesses, but we all don't want to walk into, pick a business and all 3 of us on individual attempts say, hey, we'd like your attention on this.
I thought that's what the sign-up sheet was for. Are we not using that?
I think it is, but it goes beyond that. We have multiple names assigned to those, and we just need to work it out amongst ourselves how that's going to go forward. And I think also Linda was bringing up a couple other details about how we're handling the paperwork that we're generating from this, making sure we're all on the same page and doing that. It's little niggly stuff,
I
Catherine.
feel
It's
like
not.
it's all logistics, and so that was a question.
It's
for you.
logistics.
This is,
So my thing, if it's logistics.
That
is
was the
just
word
get a
I was looking
couple-
for.
Sorry, get a couple people
Yeah.
together and don't pull the whole group to do it and just say, this is what we're gonna do. And if you need different help on the commitments, especially if there's 3 of you already going to work at that business list, that'll be a big step forward. And then you can just say, here's the folks who wants to sign up to go do it. I saw a lot of gaps. I was trying to stay more in the background on the reach out. I'm trying to take Layla's advice to heart about maybe not being so in the front of this, but I'm happy to go if we have gaps, for example, in the business community. That's community I've been trying to reach out to in many ways anyway. So I'd take a list and work 20 of them if it was necessary. You know, I'm just waiting to see what's
Okay.
left to be done.
Well,
and
and
then
it's a-
Linda, you're so good at just sorting out it looks confusing and it's a lot of detail, but you get clarity. And so if you could just, maybe you can talk with Connie and Rick, who've expressed the strong desire for this, and just see if you can hammer it out and then just tell us what to do, like not have a big session about it. I
okay.
just jumped in there. If you feel like that's not the right approach and I'm missing the boat, please
Yeah.
say.
That, and I know who's expressed interest in wanting to get that done, so I will reach out. And if anyone else wants to join in, let me know.
Yeah, and I'm not demeaning at all Rick's
No.
passion for the organization. I think that's one of the great strengths Rick has in
Mhm.
his background, and we'll make sure that we have it. So I'm just trying to get away, not around, but trying to get past the need for a big group meeting and get it done more efficiently. So
Well, and I'm glad for that too, because I feel like this is stretched out to the point where I'd like to be moving by now, and we're not. So let's get it done. Okay, we will.
Yeah,
Thanks.
we've got this survey up now, so
Yeah,
individuals
fantastic.
can take it. And just as one of the issues that you brought up, Linda, we had for the dark sky ordinance, I feel like culled a bunch of businesses for Lanita because we wanted to reach out specifically to those. So I've just asked Nancy to see if that list is still around, and if it
Great.
is, I'll shoot that over to you.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Well,
Thank everybody for not only taking the time for this, but also I thought it was a very useful conversation. I feel like I learned a lot from this and have a lot of really good ideas about how to present this material to the public at the end of the month. And I also want to thank you for staying about 15 minutes later. Linda, I'm sorry to take over your time. I just was really would have been too heartbroken to cut short the conversations around some of these not logistics, but the kind of like content around these ideas. I felt like there were a lot of really good ideas, and I wanted to keep that idea conversation going. And before we switch to the more logistical stuff, which is also important. So thank you to everybody. And Linda, if you need anything in terms of getting that clarity, if there's anything that we can do, reach out to our team as well. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Violet.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone.
thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
take care.
Thank you.